Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Hello, and welcome to episode 40 of the Caffeine Stream. My name is Sierra. I have taken over the podcast. Not really. Chris is here. We're having a delightful evening in our backyard. It is beautiful. We are recording in the summer, and it is lovely. And I am 3/4 of a way into a White Claw, and we are getting thick in a conversation that I said must be documented. This is philosophy in action.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's it's interesting at least. Maybe to some other people, and if nothing else, it could be some kind of model or example of how to have a disagreement with a spouse or something. Because you're clearly wrong about this. So.
Well, very good. All right, bring your lunch here just a smidge closer, babe. And we have our beverages, our restocks on beverages. We are prepared for a good, healthy, philosophical conversation.
Yeah, these chairs don't really accommodate easy lava mic passes.
Yes, no, so we must sit very close together. Very cozy. All right, so the topic du jour is, and please apologize, or please accept our apologies for any road noise because we are in our backyard. And people live nearby, and also for any baby sounds, because we definitely have a new baby. So, and she's always with us. So
let's start where this started, because you expressed comfort in discussing this. So I was like, okay, you have a friend that's going to a drag show, and they're excited about it, and you're like, I find this morally offensive, like a deep level. And I was like, well, I could kind of see a case for it in the old style of drag show before it got all like,
converged.
Queer and political. It was always kind of leaning that way because it's always artsy and drama. That crowd always leans that way. But, I was introduced to drag via Eddie Izzard and one might say, Monty Python.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, well, that's not like really drag. And it's true. It's not like, seeing the Monty Python crew, impersonating women in their silly manners is not the same thing as what we're seeing as drag performances now. But what we're seeing now is new, and drag performance is older than this political movement. So
so before we look for any possible defenses of drag, to state my own personal opinion, I am, for lack of a better phrase, enough of a feminist to be offended. This is why this is podcastable. To be offended by drag. I think that anyone who is dressing up as a gross caricature of an entire other gender, they never personify women in remotely a flattering way. They also, you'll notice, never talk about they're in drag to basically make a mockery of us. They overdo our makeup. They make us look super slutty, also super ugly. I don't know if it's worse when a drag queen is better looking than an actual woman, or when they do it and they do it extremely poorly. I don't know which is actually worse, but they're both bad. I don't like it. And I don't like they adopt the worst and most unattractive of our feminine mannerisms. They fall into all of the worst traps, and they absolutely make a mockery out of our sexuality specifically, and never with a side of any of our fertility, because obviously that's not the caricaturable part, right? So this is why so that's the first and most obvious. I just think it's gross, and I don't like being mocked. And secondly, I'm really opposed to participating in somebody else's weird sexual fantasy. Like, I'm not going to go if part of the fantasy for them is having me witness them and take them in their state, and I'm not participating in anybody's like weird kink thing. Like, I'm married and I participate in what we do in our own capacity. I'm not here to facilitate your sexual fantasies of being viewed as a woman on stage in front of me. Like, bleh, gross.
So, everything you said there, especially in the modern context, I agree with. I think what I'm disagreeing with is that this modern politicized thing is necessarily what all drag shows are. But before you answer that, I have a question. There are a whole host of like redneck, blue collar, farmer personality comedians that are doing their role on the stage is essentially a caricature of the blue collar working man. Would you consider that like an insult to blue collar workers when they play a caricature in that way?
Okay, there's two things there, so I'm going to try not to lose the other one. To answer your question, I'm going to give a firm, it depends. The thing is, and this is maybe something I didn't exactly express in my diatribe against drag, is that there's something mean-spirited in caricaturing someone in a way that is necessarily unflattering and draws out the worst parts of you. It's something else to remark on like a very common or familiar trope in a like, haha, can't we all agree? Like, for instance, I don't find Dude Dad, who dresses up as his wife and caricatures her in his videos, to be offensive, because it's very clearly coming from a place of love. He loves his wife, and he's just joking. But there's something you can tell when the spirit is mean. When you're mocking someone like Bo Burnham, when he pretended to be a country singer on Parks and Rec and was an absolutely wretched guy who wrote also stupid songs, quote unquote country songs. I can't remember what his character's name was, but like he was doing that in a mean spirit. Yeah. He was doing it to make fun of country singers and people who like country singers and how dumb people from Pawnee are for even liking guys like that. And that spirit you can detect when someone is mocking you versus when someone is joking with you about something we all think is funny.
Right. And this is one of Tim Pool's points about Dylan Mulvaney, is that Dylan Mulvaney is not even like, it is mocking women. Yeah. That's his assertion, and I see no reason to doubt it. And there is a way to make fun of something that is not even necessarily about the thing, that is just having fun. I think Matt Stone and Trey Parker's The Book of Mormon is a classic example. Like, even Mormons liked that show, supposedly. And but what I see in the like.
So hang on. So before you can keep going, here's the second part that I didn't want to lose track of. Even and especially before it got taken over by the like woke agenda and became politicized, I am not aware that there has ever been a time when drag did not have a distinctly sexual fantasy, like kink quality to it. The guys who did it because they were variously looking to shock people. I mean, I'm sure I don't know what Eddie Izzard wore in his own private company, but he was doing it variously to get attention and shock people, to make sure that they had to look at him, which I don't particularly appreciate having my attention dominated. And then secondly, no one who does drag is doing it because they're not fulfilling, like, they never have innocent reasons. I think again that's where like Monty Python is a little bit, I don't know, some of those guys I think actually do enjoy wearing women's clothes, and I don't know every single guy from Monty Python, but I know that a lot of them were playing characters who happen to be female, and in the same way that like Shakespeare characters were all played by men, like sometimes your character is a woman, and that doesn't offend me at all, because I'm like, yeah, obviously you have to pretend to have a female voice and you're playing an annoying woman, so yes, you're going to be kind of annoying, but that's because it's an all male cast, and so some of you have to be women, so that doesn't bother me. But the guy, even from the seeds, and I think that's where the woke took over something that had, it was a very fringe personality, and then the woke tried to like leverage it now against the rest of us. It was always something sexual.
Well, I am not sure that is. I'm not sure you're wrong, but I'm also not positive you're right either. Like, does it have to be sexual? I mean, to me, there are many reasons why someone might enjoy dressing up in women's clothes and performing in that way. And I think Monty Python is a really good example. First of all, it's just goofy. The other example that comes to my mind, you could call this drag, or you could maybe call it something else. But there's a scene in the old movie White Christmas where the two main male characters, who are both, professional entertainers, they're professional singers, have run into a pair of female singers, and they hit it off and everything. But the women need to go somewhere and they have to miss their show, so the men cover their place and perform their main act, which is a song called Sisters, dressed in the women's clothing. And it's clearly funny, and it's fun, and the audience is depicted as having a good time. And this is back in the 60s, like long before this political stuff happened. And
But
what you have there,
that's
well,
cross-dressing.
but is there a big difference between drag and cross-dressing? I think I might be speaking out of my domain of expertise here, but I don't think drag. I think drag is a lot like comedy in that you can't define it necessarily in terms of intention. I think it's more about the technique than it is about the reasoning behind the behavior. Which doesn't necessarily mean Monty Python's, performances are drag in the way that, Eddie Izzard is, but like a lot of it is humor. And the humor is not at the expense of women as a group, but at the expense of the performer, even as a man in some cases.
I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit of the Mulan problem. It's like, was Mulan, I mean, her whole song is like, when will my reflection show who I am inside? And then she becomes a dude for a while and is in the military. And it's like, was that her true form? Like, no, she just wanted to, her actually true form by the, by the end of the story arc is that she just wanted to be like, bring honor to her family. But she didn't really enjoy the caricature of being, this stereotypical bride.
She was
but
neither a man nor a stereotypical woman.
Right. She's not in case the mic didn't pick it up, she's neither a man nor a stereotypical, young Chinese bride either. And was she in her true form while she was in the military? I mean, no, it sounds kind of like she, at least from the 1990s depiction of it, she was pretty out of place. But, I think you're right that it's hard to it's hard to precisely describe a phenomena without, I think you're right that drag is a technique in general. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it would take to get you to, for lack of a less vulgar term, tuck your penis in and put a big padded bra on and put a bunch of makeup on. I don't know what it would take to get you to do that, even if you were just quote unquote playing a character. Like, I think the only people who are going to volunteer for that are ones who are doing it because it fulfills something for them, and it may not be the most sexual, but like, I think you'd be hard pressed to turn into a chick if I asked you to. Not that I'm asking under any circumstances.
Well, and this is where for me this whole conversation is very theoretical, because I very much share your taste. I have seen men who are very traditionally masculine, some of them in military special forces, to varying degrees of completeness, do like semi drag like performances, and it's almost always a comedic jokester move, and it has always been like that. And even like drag performances of the past, I imagine, are just were up until they became politicized, and they picked up and became blended with the trans thing, which is very different. Trans and drag are not the same at all, and they've been intentionally blended and blurred in the last 30 years, and so now this whole thing is confusing. But drag as a as a form of entertainment and also kind of court jester comedy, like a way to maybe pass on, wisdom with the jester's privilege, as they call it. I think that was probably the origin, because I remember fairly popular and like jockish dudes when I was in high school it wasn't drag performance in the modern sense, but they put on like skirts and wigs and did goofy skits and things, and that was funny, and they were not at all working out some personal weird sex fantasy that any of us knew about anyways.
Well, that's where I'd again return to the, like, is it in the spirit of joking and and a performance? Like, are we playing some kind of like, it's a high school play safety skit and I'm going to be the one in the wig and the nurse's costume? Or is this like what adults do, and adults do heavier and weirder and more underground stuff? I mean, the truth is, you're right that prior to the politicization of it and the confusion with the trans movement, that drag was, not synonymous with wishing you were a woman, but the autogynephilia of getting to be a woman for a while was maybe this is me having had a professor mother who taught human sexuality, but like, it's a perversion thing. They were doing it for some degree of sexual gratification. They enjoyed being perceived as women, and it's where you see the overlap with the trans movement, like the ground that makes it make sense why you can make those connections. But like, they were an underground creepy movement of dudes who did this in their free time, and they like take care of their wigs, and they're really into their makeup, and they shave their faces a particular way, like immediately before their shows. Like, it's a whole lifestyle thing that I think is heavier than just a dude putting a wig on once in a while to like play a joke. But hang on, I think the other parallel here to make is it's a little, what we have with drag is kind of the Robert Downey Jr. in blackface and Tropic Thunder problem.
I'm a dude playing this dude disguised as another dude. But I think the more real analogy is actually Mrs. Doubtfire.
Ooh. Well, but see,
is it in the intention or is it in the technique?
That's okay. Mrs. Doubtfire is a very good one, because I was going to pull the whole I think we can see from the history of like the eradication of blackface as a pantomime thing, that it's like at some point we decided that it is in poor taste to wear someone else's skin color, even if it's not a mocking thing. It's just like, oh, I'm the black character. At some point it became in poor taste, such that we could identify that Robert Downey Jr. was like right on the edge of it, and then now that show would be canceled, right?
It worked with Robert Downey Jr. because
but
he
also
was
20 years ago.
It was also very self-conscious in its mocking of the thing. It was like breaking the fifth wall there. Yeah.
And you'll notice it was the last time they really could pull something like that off in a major movie with a major actor.
Yeah, well, and you just that line, I'm the dude playing the dude disguised as another dude, and they like, what do you mean, you people? Like, it's so self-aware that it's like basically anything is forgivable at that level of self-awareness, because people get so lost in the like Schrodinger's identity of that role that it almost doesn't, like, you can't pin it down.
You have to recognize that it's just a joke.
Yeah. And I mean, there is a legitimate political argument you could make that, like, oh, if we're gonna decide to be not okay with blackface, then obviously we should also not be okay with woman face, which is like a way you could frame drag. I would just tend to lean the other way and say, like, well, who's to say that blackface can't be done well? And maybe that's not very politically popular, and I'm not sure what context you could do blackface in a way that isn't just offensive and annoying, and just uninteresting. But that's probably going to be as much a matter of like of nuance and specific details pertaining to the performer in question as it is with drag, that you can't just dismiss an entire genre just as you can't dismiss comedy outright just because some jokes actually are offensive, you know?
Well, so that's where we get into kind of where our, off-camera meandering personal conversation was going, which is to say, like, what I started this with a phrase that Chris finds annoying. I said, I'm enough of a feminist to be offended.
Oh, still annoyed.
Still annoyed. But the reason I say it like that is because as I said when we were, just discussing this, like, a version of me in a previous point in time probably would have been like, yeah, I'm with the other women of the 70s. We should be allowed to open our own bank accounts, like, I want to go to college. But on the other hand, I'm with you on while I personally find it extremely distasteful to the idea of going to a drag show, I'm like, nope, I'm not going to participate in somebody's weird. Also, sorry, I'm thinking multiple thoughts at one time. One is, I don't think there was ever as much of a layer of sexual implications about being in blackface as there is about being in woman face. So that's is a category difference that I think is relevant.
Is it though? Is a sexual performance, like, you're not opposed in principle to burlesque, are you?
Well, okay, so no, but again, see, that's where we get into the Venn diagrams of what Sierra's issue with this, because one part of it is to the degree that I don't like being mocked, I'm kind of against drag, and in that I probably am in common with people who are opposed to blackface. However, the second layer reason I have for not liking drag is that I don't want to participate in somebody else's weird sexual fantasy, but at the same time, like, I am aware of the existence of such things as pornography, which you might consider to be, it's literally explicit sexual content. So, like, obviously there's somebody else's sexual participation and kink literally happening on camera, and I'm obviously, not that I've ever seen any, but I have heard that this thing exists. It's called pornography. So, like, it's clearly it's not a hard and fast rule. I agree with you. Burlesque is kind of sexy. I've never gone to a burlesque show, but I'm, in general,
But you're jealous of people who have.
I mean, it does seem like it would be a good time.
Yeah. Well, and here again, I think the sexual component of drag is a very modern thing.
I think you're wrong.
I understand you think I'm wrong, but again, if we go back to the, like, intention versus technique question, and I want to stand by the idea that drag is a technique and not an intention. There, like, Mrs. Doubtfire is one example. The Monty Python is another. There are all kinds of cases of, people for reasons of entertainment or performance of some sort, cross-dressing in a manner that is not sexual, is not overly sexualized. Any sexual innuendo there may be is more for comedic effect than for titillation or sexual excitement. There's and like, the fact that there are other people who do get off in some weird way for doing it, like, that's almost like, that doesn't take anything away from the people who are not doing it for that reason. Just as if there was some, could you imagine, like the converse of that would be like someone doing blackface because they get some weird kind of satisfaction of walking in another's skin and experiencing the black experience. Like, that's almost progressive today. It's
well, yeah. And so to the way that our conversation initially went when we were having this organically was then to discuss the issue of, like, would I have been a feminist in the past? And it's like, obviously inserting ourselves into history, we all often, I think all of us, as a general rule, perceive ourselves to have wanted to be on the side of being the good guy. And of course, it's very easy to be on the side of being a good guy when you know the outcome and you know which side was the good guy side, or your perception of the good guy side. So, I mean, the tricky thing with inserting myself back into the past and being like, well, I probably would have been pretty pro women getting credit cards if they wanted to and being able to go to college and in the past. It depends on where you put me back in time, whether I necessarily would have agreed or not, because I definitely, while I personally find drag very distasteful, and I can't think of a reason why anyone would. I don't want to eradicate the existence of already documented blackface characters. I don't want to cancel those already existing characters, but I'm not necessarily going to run out and go to a new blackface show either. Looking back, trying to insert myself back into the past and be like, would I have agreed with it if at the time? It's very tricky because I would probably err on the side of saying we shouldn't have gotten rid of blackface shows either. It's not, I would err on the side of less censorship, even though I personally probably wouldn't go and wouldn't like it.
Yeah. Well, and again, here, I think the court jester's filter shows what the value could have been with either a drag show or a blackface performance back in the day, and why there isn't that value today. Mm-hmm. Because what you're doing when you take on the role of the fool is you're taking down the audience's defenses. It's like, oh, this is just a foolish person. This is just a woman
just having fun.
Yeah, or just a black man. What could he have to say that's intelligent? This is just entertainment. What could a woman have to say that's wise? It's just entertainment. And it puts on that guise in an especially foolish fashion because you're a bad caricature of that role. But then it gives you the opportunity to, after you've entertained them and gotten their guard down, pass on something that is actually kind of wholesome or truly good, which a lot of good comedy performances do. Now, today, the popular bigotries of the moment don't lean in that direction. And so the best comedic performances, I think, use the fool's role by pretending to be a flyover state Republican, or a Southerner.
I was just going to say that a perfect example of that kind of setting you up to lower your defenses and then state a hard truth. There's a very funny bit from Jim Gaffigan, who is a very good, clean comic, who has a very funny bit that I've seen a number of times because we're hippies who had home births, and he has a whole bit where he's like, we had a home birth just to make you uncomfortable. Everybody laughs, and then he's like, I can't remember exactly how, I don't want to parody his whole bit, but it's something to the effect of, people ask them, why would you do that? Why would you have your baby at home? And everyone assumes it's because couldn't be bothered to put on pants. I didn't feel like driving her, make everybody laugh because that's so relatable. And then he hits you with why didn't you take your wife to the place where they have sick people to have your babies? Didn't you want her to give birth in a gown someone died in? It's there's some heavy social commentary on the back end of that. Oh, I made you laugh because I made you, we had our babies at home to make you uncomfortable. That is the role of the fool. So that's and hilarious. I don't know that. I mean, think he lives in New York, but it is funny to when I'm the minority opinion. Like a conservative, it's it used to be funny to make fun of other stuff, and now it's funny to make fun of home births.
Yeah, exactly. And there are people who don't have to put on an outfit because their natural skin and gender is the role they are making fun of. Maybe my favorite example is Gabriel Iglesias, who has some Mexican jokes, but also makes fun of fat people. The one that always comes to my mind is when he said he gets pulled over by the cops, and he's got a box of donuts in his front seat, and the cop pulls up to the window and says, "Do you know why I pulled you over, son?" And he holds up the box of donuts and says, "'Cause you could smell it." and something about that joke would not work the same way if he wasn't fat.
Yeah.
You know?
It would just be rude.
Like it would just be, oh, it's just taking the piss out of cops. But because he's fat,
It's also
it changes the
self-effacing.
dynamic. Yeah, a little bit. And it's like the technique can be used in a wide variety of ways, and as with things like rhetoric or magic or like whatever other given technique, it can be employed for good or ill, but the ill employments do not make the technique itself evil. Mm-hmm. Feminism, to go back to that point, I think is different because feminism is fundamentally about an intention. It's not a technique, although it employs certain techniques in
Get there.
Today, yeah. But like, unless you don't have feminism without patriarchy theory. There is no feminism without patriarchy theory. And I think the problem with feminism, people say, oh, first and second wave feminism, those are really important. Third wave feminism took things too far. It's like, well, yes, but first and second wave feminism also took things too far because they were founded on a lie. They were founded on a couple lies, actually. Yeah. The famous French feminist who's talked about as a philosopher, I literally don't even remember her name. I'm sure everyone else will. I don't even think of her as a philosopher, but she.
Is that the Margaret Mead?
No. She was a student of the other sociologist whose name I forget, but also garbage. But this was in the 1800s, not the 19s, and she basically built the modern feminist movement and built it on a pair of lies. First of all. And this was something that James Lindsay pointed out recently. The idea that woman is something you become, not something you are, is there in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And so, the foundation for this trans infusion, which is again different from drag, it has to be emphasized, was there at the very start, as was, of course, patriarchy theory. And patriarchy theory is basically the idea that misogyny is the organizing principle of society. And it's a conspiracy theory in the very literal sense. Mm-hmm. And it's just false. It is just not true.
Yeah, I think that's where I would have a tough time because, if I was placed back in history, because I definitely am of the opinion that the worst thing to happen to this country was universal suffrage, and more motorcycles going by.
It's like a Ducati or something.
It looks very nice. I don't know a lot about motorcycles, but
It's not like a good cafe racer, but it's a decent one.
My personal preference when it comes to motorcycles is, while I have a certain, in the way that people like Tom Selleck, I can appreciate the principle of an ape hanger kind of motorcycle, or a Harley Davidson, but God, I am not a loud motorcycle fan. I like the loud, just belching sound is not my jam. Something sporty like a Ducati would be better. Anyway, I can appreciate it as a character that is oh yes, I understand that there was a point in time when that was real hot and sexy, but I'm not a Harley kind of gal, she says, without ever possessing a motorcycle at all.
You would be if I had one.
I would be if you had one, that's true. Poor Chris is one of those married men and fathers who had to sell his project motorcycle when we got married and started having kids and needed to get that thing out of their backyard.
I didn't have to sell it. I had no place to put it, and it was leaking gasoline. It just didn't make sense to keep. Oh, I will absolutely get another one when we get a garage. Don't you worry.
The minute we have a place to store a project motorcycle, believe me, we'll get a piece of junk to sit in our yard, just like everybody else. My dad also is one of those men who once had a motorcycle, and I have one very tiny memory as a small child of sitting on a motorcycle in front of our house that I grew up in, immediately before my dad had to sell it because, similar to you, we had no where to put it, and it was a project motorcycle.
So anyways, back to men oppressing women.
The first oppression is convincing us that motorcycles are sexy. Second oppression is making us ride in the back of them instead of the front. I have no desire to ride in the front of a motorcycle. You can do the steering. I also make you drive the minivan.
It sounds like oppression to me.
So impressed, dude. If I could sit on the sitting on the back not having to steer is the oppression is convincing you that you want to be driving. Hang on. I'm circling back. I'm getting there. You made me laugh, and now the White Claw has revealed itself.
Well, this is the problem.
Well,
we oppress you with alcohol too.
So oppressed. Anyway, I think when people say, "Oh, third wave feminism went too far," the problem is that everyone's looking. And this is, I think, is kind of an NPC move, and everyone has fallen victim to this. But it's kind of the NPC move is to look at the effects and not the ideology. And so, yeah, like I probably would have been pro. I should get my own bank account, and I should go to college, and et cetera, et cetera. But the undergirding philosophy that was advocated by the people who pushed for those nominal quote unquote improvements in our lives was, like you said, this belief that there's this, underwriting misogyny that drives everything, and, women are being kept at home because they're putting us here, and et cetera, instead of recognizing, like, it's more complicated than that. And, of course, the way that they get the ideology in general forward is by giving us the carrot of very small stuff that, frankly, makes sense. Women should be allowed to inherit property from their fathers. Like, okay, that seems pretty reasonable. And it's really kind of shitty to be in the position, even modernly, of having to say, like, the worst thing that ever happened to America was universal suffrage, because once you have it, it's really crappy to have to take it away, right? It's really crappy to have to be like, oh, I don't think women should have the vote. But I mean, I think if you and I went far enough back, we'd be like, well, technically no one who doesn't own land should have the vote, but no one who hasn't been in the military and willing to put their body in front of the country should have the right to vote.
Well, a funny story is I read yesterday that supposedly Elon Musk came out in favor of rescinding the vote from people who don't have children. Not that that's going to happen. It was just something sort of in the abstract that he would support.
I agree.
And it makes sense.
Can this be like Hungary? In Hungary, I guess they have like tax exemptions. You get like 25% off your taxes or whatever for having children. And I've got 4 kids, so I'd be 100% off on my taxes. So like, can I get votes like that?
We'd have to move to Hungary for that, I'm sure. But it's always complicated with politics because the stated mechanism isn't always the actual effect. And I mean, if that isn't indeed what's going on in Hungary, like, probably good. To me, the thing that matters with the vote, if you're going to have, a republic with a democratic component, is to have the incentives aligned for the long-term interest of the state. And there, either land ownership or having children are both, relatively, not perfect, but relatively good, skin in the game measures of buying into that long-term interest of the nation. So that's what legitimizes the vote there. And I think like with the thing, and this is a point that Karen Strawn brought up, women got women's suffrage in the United States in 1922. And people often forget, what was the year that men got universal suffrage in the United States?
1919. It was immediately before.
1920, yes. Yeah. And the reason they got universal suffrage was because they sued for it. They sued and they said, you can't draft us unless we have suffrage. No, it was essentially an extension of the no taxation without representation argument. And then 2 years after men got universal suffrage, on the back of the draft for World War I, dying on the battlefield in France and Germany, women get it without a draft.
No, that's okay. This is my critique of feminism, is that it is all from, I think the entire feminist movement from the very beginning, probably from the 1880s, and from the UK, like always, has it's a movement founded and run by bitter, ugly spinsters and little sisters. Because only a little sister would be like, oh my God, he got the vote and I should get it too. And it's like, okay, let's follow the timeline. First, we said all of you must go and fight for our country, not because we're in a battle, but because our allies are, and we're putting everybody in. They're calling people off the bench here. America's not even involved, and we're gonna pay that check anyway. And the men go, hey, I should get to vote in whether I have to go to this. And they were like, all right, we'll allow it. And then somebody's little sister came along and goes, hey, me too. We're doing a lot of work here on the front lines at home knitting socks. We should get the vote too. And somebody's horny dad was like, all right.
Well, and that's the ultimate condemnation of patriarchy theory, is that men gave it to them.
Right?
Yeah,
it's guys fucking acquiesce every time.
And I mean, that's I think the real history of the world is not patriarchy, but not men, conspiring together to keep women down, but rather competing with other men in order to impress and please women, for all kinds of reasons.
Well, to return to the topic of comedy too, I just saw a very funny bit from a gal, Ali Wong, I think is her name, and she's some of her stuff I find a little distasteful, but some of it is very funny. And she was heavily pregnant as she was remarking that the worst thing that feminism ever did was convince all the men that women are just as strong as men are. We want to go to work too. And she's like, no, bitch. We had a great deal. We were at home. We didn't have to go anywhere. We didn't have to do anything. And now you got all these women out here being like, no, I can work too. And now we all got to work.
So then let's bring it back to the conversation that and the comment that I'm very proud that you didn't send to your girlfriend. We're going to the drag show where you were thinking about saying, I'm enough of a feminist to be, offended by this. And to me, like, being any bit of a feminist is too much, right? Because again, feminism is not like, I want good things for myself. It's an intention and a worldview that is grounded in gender depression in that way.
Okay, well, yes. So I think I started to make this remark previously that, we all like to think when we look back on history that we would be one of the good guys. We'd be one of the good ones, whatever position that was, right? I'd be the one to harbor the Jews. I'm a good guy. Sure. Sure you would. There's a whole conversation about the Nazis and the Jew harborers. Yeah, but
all the people who most virulently hate and oppose Nazis would absolutely have been Nazis.
Oh God, right? Like, you're a Nazi now.
Oh, God.
But anyway, the thing is, I like to think that I would have been one of those. Because you got to understand, and I know we have talked about this on, I think, the marriage podcast, and I think it should be quite evident just from the fact of who I married. I think men are fucking great. Men are awesome. Men are doing shit in our best interest. Like, God, go trace some power lines, man. You're awesome.
Women are pretty friggin' awesome too.
Yeah, whatever. Sure we are. I'm glad you think that of me specifically, because you put up a lot of shit. Anyway, so I'd like to think I'd be one of those feminists who would have gone, hey, since we integrated schools across genders and started doing these things to, give girls a leg up, all these boys sure are suffering. And I'd like to think that I'd be one of those Camille Paglia types who gets pushed out by the other feminists because they're like, hey, we're not here to fix men's issues. And I'd like, well, a honey badger you just created. But because, if you plot me specifically down in the past, I think I would have been pretty pro puffy shirts and tight trousers as well. Anyway, there's a whole men. If you don't look, I'm not trying to give advice, but I am trying to say that, like, if you ever ask, men will be like, why isn't there lingerie for men? Like, what do women want to see us in? You guys are all like, man, 4-inch inseam shorts, gray sweatpants, and also just go look up, what's his name? Colin Firth in Pride and Prejudice. And just one time, just put on the puffy shirt and the trouser pants and God, bitches will be tripping, man. Anyway, what I was trying to say is I love men. And I think at any point in time, I would have been hey guys, I thought we said that this was about equality because I also love dudes. And I probably would have gotten kicked out of the group. The other women don't caught into that too well.
But that's also part of the problem is like the equality foundation itself is like a myth. I mean, the real knockdowns of the equality thing to me at the very foundational level is like you are not or should not be equal even to yourself from the previous day. Like the idea that people are equal only makes sense and only is argued in any meaningful way within the context of politics as a repudiation of the divine right of kings. Like that's the sense of all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence, arguably. And like if you take it in any other sense than that, it is literally just wrong. Even if that requires me to say the Declaration of Independence is wrong, I will absolutely bite that bullet. People are not equal, and
okay, yes, I will. Yes, we're not the same. I will say that it is not obvious to me necessarily that it should take a man's signature to open that bank account. Sure. So but
do you think women should also be drafted?
I don't think there should be a draft. So this is
Okay,
kind of is kind of a turtles all the way down problem.
Sure, friend. Like in the ideal sense, but nations have to defend themselves.
This is true. So I mean, okay. Well, I will demonstrate my preference for a certain ethnicity of men specifically who have chronic white knight volunteerism, and generally those nations tend to have very well stocked armies because men can't help. Those certain kinds of men that I know who I'm referring to have a tendency to volunteer for safety.
Don't make me edit this out.
I don't want to. Well, anyway, point is, most men volunteer for the role. I think anyway, all the men who were lying about their age so they could go to war, I think, are a testament to the fact that if a sufficiently valid war, men will go and fight it. Also, Odysseus spent 20 freaking years at war and trying to get back from it.
Yeah,
so
but Odysseus tried to flee the draft by pretending to be mad.
Well, I mean that's a pretty strong move. I know also Jim Morrison tried to do that too, and I think he succeeded.
A lot of people succeeded. A lot of people fled to Canada and evaded the draft variously.
How did all of Canada evade the draft? Thank you very much, Canada, for your strong contribution. I'm sure some of you showed up.
Let's not bash on Canada. I just learned like last week that Canada, for its tiny military and like fairly like marginal participation in global wars, has like a higher war crimes per capita per military involvement than like any other country.
Canadians will say please and thank you. They will open that door for you, and they will do unspeakable things to you abroad when they're off their country, though. When they're off their own continent, they'll fuck you up. What's the oh gosh, I almost had it. It's like Huntington. I can't think of the name of that. there's like a, oh man, I'm trying to think of it. It's company in the way that like the India Trading Company was a company, but it wasn't like an organization, and they were like Hudson Bay. Yeah, there you go. The Hudson Bay Company. They've got some pretty badass stories. So
yeah.
I mean,
up until like a couple of years ago, a Canadian sniper had the longest confirmed kill. And it was basically just a for fun shot across the valley in Kandahar somewhere.
Okay, so I'm going to stand by the fact that there's a certain class of men who will volunteer because they just want to, and it's kind of, well, maybe a little bit for fun. And I have a certain respect for that. So anyway, no, I don't think women should be drafted. I don't think anybody should be drafted. But if they're going to be drafted, I mean, I think we've discussed before that, in our opinion, if we had the ability to rewrite shit and fix it for once and for all, we would go with you've got to pick 3 out of 5 to get suffrage. You need to be married, be a landowner, have children, be over 35, and I think be in the military. I think was our 5th one. I can't remember.
Public service of some sort, like a Starship Troopers kind of public service of some variety or other.
So, and I think if you had to pick 3 out of 5 of those in order to qualify to vote, I mean, like, those would be reasonable investments. Yeah. It would be achievable for almost everybody who's currently voting, and critically not achievable for certain people who are voting. And, you know, I mean, obviously some people are going to get fake married, and we'd have to define what marriage is, and that's a whole other podcast for another day.
But like any system can be gamed at the end of the day. And I mean, I think that's to bring it back full circle. I think that's what we're seeing with drag. It's like drag is a fairly old phenomenon. I think there were accounts of cross-dressing performances back in the days of Greece and Rome where they were also both misinterpreted and abused in a manner culturally similar to what we're seeing today. You know, but again, a technique is different than an ideology. And I think the difference between drag and feminism is that distinction, which is why I'm like bristling at even a marginal acknowledgement of good in feminism, whereas drag is like, I don't know, I could see, you know, Monty Python or Mrs. Doubtfire style, like, positive, and I don't know if those are technically qualify as drag, but they seem within that technique genre.
Well, and okay, so to make one final point, I think I keep teeing it up and then managing to whiff it every time I start to say this, but the reason I use the phrase I'm enough of a feminist is that I almost used the phrase. I've been play testing the phrase, is because for me as a recovering Seattleite, not blowing my cover has been a deeply ingrained trait in my social interactions with people. So especially if I have secured one of only a handful, if you have a wife who is married, or if you are yourself a woman, especially with children, you know how freaking hard it is to find mom friends. If I'm gonna run the risk of alienating my one and only mom friend, I want to be damn sure it's over something important. And so for the purposes of not tipping my hand and revealing all of my party politics and every other position I might have, there's a nice little catch-all copywriting type phrase you can use, like I'm enough of a feminist, which covers all of my bases so that you can't necessarily, from this one instance on my opinion on drag, triangulate my entire ideology. I think if you listen to this podcast, though, you're going to figure it out pretty quick.
But this dovetails into another phrase we've gone over in a couple years ago, though I don't think it's been mentioned on the podcast yet. I know I've written about it, but that's the phrase white Sharia. Oh. As far as sexism and gender is concerned. So this phrase, white Sharia, emerged in far right circles in, what was this, like 2015, 2016?
Yeah.
Somewhere around there, 2016, 2017 maybe. And the idea was, you know, leftists hate white gender roles, but they're totally fine with Islamic, extremely reactionary and conservative gender roles. That is totally fine. That's a part of their culture and is to be respected and so forth. Niqab, burqa, whatever. That's totally fine. Oh, commendable even. In fact, we will cross-dress and wear blackface if we're Justin Trudeau and his associates to do things like that in ridiculous ways.
Freaking Canadians.
And right. And so these far-right trolls, I don't mean far right in a denigratory way, even just they were, said, well, what if we call like 1960s white American gender roles just white Sharia? It's like Sharia in that we have like gender roles, but it's the white version of that. Mm-hmm. And it started out as a meme and as a joke. And how like, oh, white Sharia is a lot, less severe than brown Sharia. It's just a different kind of Sharia, And it was very funny until
some people, like they always do, screwed the pooch and took it too far.
Well, it's impossible not to take it too far when you repeat it enough times, and it becomes a part of your unironic identity. And that's how these things always work. And that's why I think. For all the negative things you might be able to say about Jordan Peterson, he is absolutely correct in the psychological importance of speaking the truth, or at least not lying on these points and not saying things. Maybe C.S. Lewis even said it better, to make things socially nice and convenient, and to lie for social convenience, because truths or not truths, positions taken ironically or as a joke or as a convenience, when you repeat them too much, you become invested in that cover. You become invested in the joke. Mm-hmm. You become invested in the phrase, and it becomes unironic. And many of these guys who started white Sharia as a joke, really not extreme, by a passage of 1,000 itty-bitty reframes, come out 2 years later on the other side, unironically arguing for like white women in headscarves and not working, and like truly is like orthodox Islamic level reactionary conservative positions.
Well, and I know the phenomena to which you're referring, and I also know the dresses I would wear under such such law, which is to say the ones I already own. But the mosquitoes are starting to come out, so we have to wrap this up. But
speaking of women,
the bloodsuckers that are coming for us, I do want to give a brief shout out to our one and only, the only good Canadian. I don't know if I should say his name on the podcast. I know his Instagram handle. No?
There are lots of good Canadians.
There's one in particular who I know shares your podcast all the time in his stories. I'm not going to call you out by name, but there's one good Canadian, and he's on Instagram, and I don't want you to think there's a few. We'll let a few of you in the event of the apocalypse. But I know what you mean about the referring to terms. I also would say that there's who was it? I can't remember who the people were. You had me listen to this part of that Tim Cast culture podcast that he has. It was him and Lauren Southern. I'm sorry, can hear myself mixing my syllables just enough that I think I might be a little drunk, babe. But I tried to say Soren Luthern. I got myself. Lauren Southern and Tim Pool and somebody else were on his culture podcast talking, and they were discussing the oh god, I'm trying really hard to keep this linear, guys. I'm really working for this. He the guy whose name I can't think of, was saying that there is something to be said for making alliances with people who you agree with on a particular topic until it is no longer expedient to be allies with them. And Lauren and
Seamus, his Catholic friend, yes.
Yeah.
He does Freedom Tunes.
Yes. Okay, there you go. Thank you. I gave you enough prompt. So Seamus was saying that we should be allowed to make alliances with people who are basically convenient voting blocks for us on topics that matter until we diverge. And Lauren and Tim could not handle the way he was saying that, and it made sense to me.
No, what Lauren and Tim were saying was actually the more aggressive form of that. They were saying basically, like we should be friends with people because it's politically expedient and even necessary. And Seamus was trying to draw a line in the sand and make a point of saying, I think it's very important to not break our own beliefs in making these alliances. And Tim was saying, why would you commit political suicide like that? You'll get nothing. And Seamus was clarifying later. He says, no, I'm not opposed to making alliances. He says, I'm just for making the contingencies of those alliances transparent and clear up front, which is like a different point in saying, okay, we're with you in taking on these people, but like we're not going to sell our soul and change our own fundamental identity and beliefs based upon what is politically convenient. And I think Lauren Southern and Tim Poole were losing that nuance there. And that's also the point I'm making about saying about not taking on the feminist label even for a moment of convenience and cover.
Well, I think that's where I might, I don't know if I disagree with you, but like, to me, there is something, like, I know what my values and principles are. And if I was in a more strident position of power or pursuing one, I would not mind saying, you know, I'm enough of a feminist to be offended by this or whatever, or allying myself. Like, I guess I fall on the same side with J.K. Rowling on the trans issue in general. But, you know, I didn't think we needed to go out of our way to insist that Dumbledore was gay, as though it mattered to the 15-year-old he was teaching anyway. Like, it should not have mattered whether he was gay anyway. He's an adult and Harry's a kid. Should not matter. But anyway, I'm losing the train of thought just a little bit, guys. I'm working on it. Chris is trying to help me. Trying to help me combat mosquitoes to keep the podcast going.
Yeah, we carried a citronella plant over. Hopefully that will help. Well, I mean, I think we might have different ideas about how values work, though, because, like, so have you ever been in a debate or a conversation with someone where someone said something and you found yourself speaking and the words were coming to you as you thought them?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
So, like, I think our values and the way we think is a lot like that. And our values are very much a product of what works in conversation. And while there are like aesthetic ideals, like visual ideals and experiential ideals that are not linguistic, that sort of undergird things, what we actually say in the moment is often, and what we pledge our allegiance to is often based upon what has worked in the past. And in that very, like, it is very easy in principle to say one thing and mean something else, as Achilles condemned in the Iliad. But I think over time that actually does become less tenable, and we as you know, we become what we say over time, and we in the manner of the white Sharia thing, we do become invested in our defensive shells. We become invested in our covers and in our humorous reframes and in our hot takes, and it can become a trap that we then want to live out. And sometimes, as C.S. Lewis pointed out in the Screwtape Letters, we can become addicted to the amusing contradiction between what we say on one hand and what we in fact are or believe ourselves to be on the other. But over time, which is the whole point of Screwtape the Demon's advocacy to his nephew, like that gap gives in, and the 2 points merge over time.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. It's one of the the kind of mindfuck qualities of being, especially a conservative in on the West Side. And I know you've made this reference to Curtis Yarvin before, that if you just pantomime the opposite of if you are in a culture where somebody, everyone around you is doing this thing that you hate, and so you're like, fuck you guys, I'm going to do the opposite. You haven't actually left the frame. You're just like, they told you that the opposite of everything they are is a Nazi, so you became a Nazi, and you're like, you didn't actually think for yourself. You just are a reactionary. And to that degree, once you say that oppositional defiant tendency to be like, well, I'm a conservative from Seattle, or that trapping, but
Or
still wanting,
I'm enough of a feminist.
well, right. So that desire to not necessarily alienate a friend who might be a really good friend, and so maybe she'll respond to this. You're right that the more you attach those like little hedging phrases to yourself, the more you're kind of just softening the edges of your actual position and making it a little harder to protect when push comes to shove. The good thing is the first text message I actually started to write, because she happens to work in a flower shop, is florist by day, insulting man who mocks women by night, was what I initially was going to type, and I instead asked, are you excited about this, to see what her opinion was.
Yeah. Well, and I think the solution here, if I know I'm supposed to be a conservative here, but if I can quote another leftist to the point is, you can say what you want to say without falling into prefabricated phrases. Mm-hmm. And it takes more effort. And this is George Orwell's point in Politics in the English language, is like thinking through what you want to say can take more effort, but it's actually clarifying and leads to, I think, deeper thinking and a closer relationship between what you say and what you actually want in life, which is, I think, the goal that most of us are trying to pursue. And it's a tragedy that our language can often derail us or can be derailed for us if we accept the language of other people.
Yeah, and it also is just hard as an adult. I mean, we all kind of lament that, like, man, remember when you were a kid and it was so easy to make friends? Like, you just showed up at the park and, like, now you're friends with that kid who you also went on the swings with. It is tough being an adult, because it's like, you try and make friends, you try and get to know people, and there's always like some issue where you're like, oh, and I'm out, and you're like, oh, I'm crunchier than all of my friends because I had my babies at home, and whatever other weird thing that for somebody else would be like, oh, well, she is married to a philosopher, like, oh, she doesn't like drag, or she's too in your face, or whatever. Everybody's too much for somebody, and there's like a single issue friendship quality where you're like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. So like, am I gonna be friends with her later? Yeah, probably. She's pretty awesome. I don't know. She's also got that Christian quality where she might be there to like, either proselytize or demonstrate her open-mindedness first, so that now she gets a little bit of an upper hand in the later proselytization. I don't know. She's not super pushy, but I wouldn't put it past her either. I don't know. I don't know what her motives are.
But it's not about her, really. It's about our language and what we say to each other, to other people, because we're also saying that to ourselves when we speak to other people.
It's just, it's hard. Making friends is hard as an adult. You're like, you don't want to necessarily lose a whole friendship because you're like, okay, here's my actual opinion. And they're like, okay, bye. It's hard. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but I think the friends you lose, speaking as someone who has lost friends over the years, the friends you lose because you spoke sincerely and honestly were never friends worth keeping in the long run, which doesn't mean they're not good people. It just meant the relationship was maybe not like, a good fit, and that's fine.
Well, and I want to give one last little parting thought of wisdom, because this is the reason I opted, instead of insulting the idea that she was going to go to this event, I decided to opt for, well, I hope you have fun, I think is what I said to her. She's like, this is a blast. I'm like, great. I saw this piece of advice on ye old Instagrams, and I think it is good advice that I wish more people knew, which is there is something to be said for, you can be honest, but also have tact. And so in the moment, while she hasn't gone yet and she's excited about it, it would be rude of me to shit on her thing and to be rude. So, later, at some point when I see her again, I'll be like, hey, what did you think of that drag thing? Like, I don't know. I probably wouldn't have gone to something like that because I find that pretty insulting towards women, right? Like then she's no longer in the heat of moment excited to go see a performance and support her friend who she's there to see. I can have that conversation outside of that context. It's no less honest of me. And this is why I didn't have to deliver my I'm enough of a feminist line, even though I composed it, because you know what? Like you said, it doesn't actually describe my position, and it would, in a way, be less honest because it's a self-protecting phrase that I created than for me to just later have a conversation with her about it.
Well, and I will say, and I share your taste when it comes to drag. I'm not like, especially these modern drag shows that are this queer, trans-oriented, sexualized performance. It's like, this is gross. This is awful. Why would anyone go to this? But some people are kind of into that. Like, if your friend and her husband quietly kind of enjoy that together, and they enjoy that together, and like,
I don't know that her husband's going.
Okay.
Somebody's at home with the children, presumably. So, I mean, I think she probably went with her coworkers to go support the fellow coworker. But anyway.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, let's hypothetically imagine they got a babysitter and went together, just for wholesomeness' sake. Like that's.
I don't know what's more wholesome, the idea that her husband's there and together are getting some kind of enjoy. Anyway, moving on. Continue. What's your point? What's your point, sir? Wrap it up.
I'm just saying, like, different people have different tastes, I'll say. And if your friend is, playing the waters to see, is this like a taste that maybe we could share together, and you just be like, nope.
Right.
Nope. Like,
and not every friend has to serve every purpose, right?
Yeah.
So I may not even have a conversation with her about it, but
I guess what I'm trying to say is that an aesthetic taste that we don't share is not necessarily an ideology,
right.
Especially from someone who's in the Christian world and probably has that, like, I've been pigeonholed as a puritanical goody two-shoes Christian. I have this deep urge to break out of the caricature that has been built around me and look at how interesting I can be. Like, like, there are all kinds of reasons that people might enjoy doing something like that isn't ideological.
Or might even just, frankly, I think what I asked was, are you excited, or are you just there to see the circus? And she's like, kind of both. And I'm like, okay, you might, honestly, as a conservative person, I have no inclination to go, but I've heard a lot about them. And, there is something to be said for a little on-the-ground investigative journalism, to be like, is this really what the pundits and people say it is? I'm going to go look for myself. Like, I certainly have looked at things that I don't agree with and been like, yes, I came all the way here to see this circus of monkeys. Very interesting, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like 100% on board and excited about it. Sometimes you're just there to see the freak show. But
and if it is a freak show, it is I think fine to say, I think modern drag shows are caricatures of women and offensive to women, and like I have no interest in going to this or hearing about it without leaning into the feminist thing.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for, like, you can be honest without necessarily having to be tactless. I think both you and I went through a honest and also tactless phase in college.
Yeah. Can we say new atheism in the 20-teens?
Can we say conservative on the west side in our late teens? Yes, it was a rough time when we were in our early 20s.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I think is there anything else to say? I think it's enough of a conversation for the evening and the mosquitoes.
We've insulted Canadians,
but also complimented them,
and also motorcycles, and we've discussed drag shows at length. I think that's a full pie. Their White Claw is empty, and I think that's a full show.
Okay. Well, we'll call it good. Thanks for listening, whoever made it through this whole thing. Take care.